Welcome to Trending Unpacked, where we make sense of what the world is searching for.
Today we're looking at something that's really blowing up online, and for good reason. It's a crisis that feels like a terrifying preview for a lot of major cities. We're talking about what's happening in Tehran with its water supply.
That's right. And if you've been on social media or watching the news, you really can't miss it. The visual proof is just, it's everywhere.
Oh, absolutely.
You have these alarming satellite images that are circulating, showing these huge reservoirs like the Amir Kabir Dam,
Yeah.
and they just look, oh, they look empty.
It's stark. It's just vast stretches of cracked, dry earth where there should be millions and millions of cubic meters of water.
And it's not just satellite photos, right? The noise coming from inside Iran is getting louder and louder.
It is. People are documenting it themselves. You see posts about rolling blackouts, water cuts that come without any warning, and, these shocking videos of famous rivers.
Like the Karaj River.
Exactly. Or the Zayanda Rud in Isfahan. They're just gone. They're parched channels, or at best, a trickle of polluted water. And those visuals, I think, are really driving this huge public frustration.
It feels like it's moved beyond just an environmental warning. It's now in the territory of a geopolitical emergency.
It really is.
And that's underscored by this truly stark warning that came from President Masoud Pezeshkian. He actually suggested that Tehran, a city of nearly 10 million people, might have to be evacuated.
Which is an incredible thing to say out loud.
A full evacuation if, meaningful rain doesn't show up soon.
For a capital city of that size, that history, to even float the possibility of evacuation because of environmental collapse.
Yeah.
It just shows you how severe this has become.
Exactly. So that's what we need to unpack today. We're going to get into how Iran got to this point of what some analysts are calling water bankruptcy.
It's a powerful term.
It is. And it means looking at everything, the climate stress, years of what looks like political mismanagement and infrastructure that's just failing. And ultimately, we want to figure out what lessons this huge city struggle holds for the rest of us.
Because Tehran is a perfect, if terrifying, case study. It shows how governance failure and climate risk don't just add up. They multiply each other exponentially.
Okay, so let's start with what people are actually living through right now. If you're in Tehran today, what does this crisis look like? How bad is the shortage?
Well, the situation is both acute and chronic. You have to understand, this isn't just one bad, dry year.
Right.
Tehran is in the middle of the most persistent dry spell they had in 60 years. We're talking 5 consecutive years of a devastating drought.
5 years. So the system has had absolutely no time to recover, no chance to replenish itself.
Precisely. That kind of cumulative stress is what pushes a system past its breaking point. And if you want to put numbers on it, it's pretty shocking.
Let's hear 'em.
Tehran gets its water from 5 main dams. You have Lar, Mamlu, Lachian, Karaj, and Taligan. Right now, the usable storage across all 5 of those has dropped to about 170 million cubic meters.
Okay, and what does that mean in context?
It means that figure is roughly half of what it was this time last year.
Wow, half.
And last year was already considered a bad year, so it's a failure of the natural system to deliver rain and a failure of the political system to manage what little it has.
Half the supply for a city of nearly 10 million people in the middle of a scorching summer. The math there is just brutal.
And that deficit is driven by an almost total collapse in rainfall. Here's the data point that really stands out.
Go ahead.
For the current water year, officials reported that rainfall was down 96% compared to last year's already low numbers.
96%.
And nearly a 98% drop compared to the long-term historical average. So, think about it like this. An area that got maybe 48 millimeters of rain last year is getting less than 2 millimeters this year.
That's not a drought.
Right.
That's a system failure. It's an environmental catastrophe hitting one of the biggest cities in the region.
Absolutely.
So what is the day-to-day reality for people in Tehran with temperatures hitting over 40 degrees Celsius? What does this actually feel like?
The consequences for daily life are they're catastrophic. You have these constant rolling blackouts, which are necessary because there's not enough water to run the hydropower plants.
Right, the power grid is connected to the water supply.
And then you have the unannounced water cuts. In some neighborhoods, people are saying the water is off for up to 48 hours, sometimes even 3 days in a row.
3 days with no water in that heat.
People are describing really unsanitary conditions. You can't cook, you can't clean. It's a critical disruption to just basic living.
And what's the government's response to this, the immediate visible one?
Well, it seems to be aggressive rationing and restrictions that kind of shift the blame onto the consumer. A senior utility official announced publicly that they'd be cutting the water supply for 12 hours to any household that's deemed a heavy consumer and ignores 3 warnings.
A heavy consumer.
And they've also brought in these really severe fines for households that use what the authorities claim is, way over the recommended average.
Wait a second. You just told us the core issue is a 98% drop in rainfall and dams that are half empty.
Right.
But the government is focusing on fining people.
Yeah.
Doesn't that feel like a huge distraction from the real problem?
It absolutely does. I mean, of course they want to discourage consumption. But in the face of these massive structural issues, it feels misplaced. It's a classic political move, really.
Blame the individual.
Blame individual behavior instead of addressing the systemic flaws that are much harder and, frankly, much more politically expensive to fix.
Okay, so that's the acute crisis. But like we see with so many of these disasters, the weather is just the trigger. The gun was already loaded.
That's a great way to put it.
Analysts keep calling this an anthropogenic drought, a man-made drought. So what are the deep structural problems that made Tehran so vulnerable in the first place?
This is really the heart of the matter. Officials will often point to sanctions or just climate change, but the consensus among experts is that this is the result of decades of really fragmented, short-sighted planning.
So climate change is just the amplifier.
It's a powerful amplifier, yes, but the system was already broken. It was, as one analyst put it, a man-made drought, turbocharged by climate change.
So let's go through those man-made drivers. What's the first one?
Sheer scale. You have to start with the rapid, almost uncontrolled population growth and urban sprawl.
How rapid are we talking?
Iran's population went from about 37 million to over 90 million in less than 5 decades.
Wow.
That kind of growth puts an enormous, unsustainable strain on what are, naturally limited resources. Tehran just exploded in size without a sustainable water plan to go along with it.
90 million people, all depending on a shrinking water supply, while the city just keeps getting bigger. That points to a huge resource allocation problem.
It does.
So where is all the water actually going?
And that brings us to the second, and I'd say the most critical structural flaw, agricultural inefficiency.
Okay.
The agricultural sector in Iran consumes an absolutely overwhelming amount of the country's water. We're talking somewhere between 80 and 93% of the total supply.
80 to 93%. That is staggering. Why so high?
It's a combination of really outdated, inefficient irrigation methods, and on top of that, a policy of subsidizing water-intensive crops.
Like what?
Think rice or watermelons being grown in arid or semi-arid regions where, common sense tells you they just shouldn't be.
So you're growing some of the thirstiest crops in the driest parts of the country year after year. That doesn't sound like a technical mistake.
Yeah.
That sounds like a long-term policy disaster.
It's exactly that, and it's driven by political motives, not hydrological ones. This then leads directly to the third catastrophic driver, the depletion of groundwater.
Because the rivers and dams aren't enough to support that kind of agriculture.
Not even close. So to make up the difference, for decades, there has been this uncontrolled over-extraction of underground aquifers. Farmers, industries, they've dug millions of illegal wells, and this has created a geological catastrophe.
Land subsidence. The silent earthquake.
Yes. We need to talk about this because it's a terrifying concept that's not just unique to Iran.
Explain the mechanism. How does pumping groundwater make the land sink?
It's actually quite simple, but the effects are devastating. The ground beneath our feet isn't solid rock everywhere. A lot of it is clay and sediment, held up by the pressure of the water within it.
Okay.
When you pump out massive amounts of that groundwater, you remove that support. The clay and sediment layers then compact under their own weight. They shrink, and the surface level sinks.
And this is happening all over Iran.
It's widespread. It's affecting over 30 provinces. But Tehran itself is sinking at an astonishing rate.
How fast?
Estimates put the average subsidence rate in Tehran at around 24 to 25 centimeters a year.
A year? That's almost a foot.
And in some of the worst hit areas, it's been measured at up to 31 centimeters a year. For comparison, the maximum acceptable rate for infrastructure safety is usually a few millimeters.
This has to be causing huge damage to buildings, to roads.
It does. But the most crucial part is what it does to the aquifer itself. Once that soil compacts, its ability to hold water is permanently reduced. It's like squeezing a sponge and then letting it harden.
So even if the rains do come back,
the ground can't absorb and store the water like it used to. The natural storage capacity is gone forever.
So subsidence isn't just about the city sinking. It's about permanently destroying the land's ability to recover. That makes this a fundamentally different kind of crisis.
It introduces a terrifying element of irreversibility, and
Hmm.
then on top of all that, you have the infrastructure failure within the city itself.
So even the water they do manage to get into the system is being lost.
A huge amount of it, yes. We're talking about something called non-revenue water, or NRW.
Which is water lost to leaks or theft or even just bad metering.
Exactly. And the national average for NRW across Iran is critically high. It's somewhere in the range of 25 to 30%.
A quarter to a third of their entire dwindling water supply just vanishes from the system before it even reaches a consumer.
It's catastrophically inefficient. It implies both theft and inaccurate metering, but also just massive physical leakage from the pipes.
Is it just a case of old crumbling pipes?
It's actually deeper than that. There was a detailed study done on Tehran's water network using some pretty complex analysis, and it found that the key drivers were really poor quality control and mismanagement.
So not just age, but how it was built.
Right. The top three factors were, first, incorrect and non-standard installation of pipes. Second, poor training for the workers and experts who are supposed to maintain the system. And third, just a lack of timely replacement of broken parts.
So it's not just old infrastructure. It's infrastructure that was poorly designed, badly installed, maintained by people who weren't properly trained, and then just left to fall apart.
That's a perfect summary, and it all points back to a failure of governance, of oversight, of just basic technical standards.
And why wasn't there investment in fixing this?
This study noted a really crucial economic reason. Because the price of water has been kept artificially low for decades through massive government subsidies, there was, and I'm quoting here, no economic justification for leakage detection.
Wow. So because water was basically free, there was no financial incentive to stop wasting it.
Precisely. That low price creates this self-defeating loop. It encourages overuse by consumers, while at the same time, it discourages the utility from investing in the efficiency the system desperately needs to survive.
Let's zoom out for a moment. This kind of stress can't just be an internal Iranian problem. It has to be a geopolitical flashpoint.
Oh, absolutely. It's a massive warning sign for regional stability. Water scarcity is already a geopolitical pressure cooker all across the Middle East.
We see it fueling conflict, migration.
Everywhere. I mean, look at the Nile Basin. Ethiopia building the Grand Renaissance Dam has created immense tension with Sudan and Egypt, who depend on that river for their very survival.
Yeah.
Or think about the Tigris and Euphrates, shared by Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. Upstream dam projects in Turkey have severely restricted the flow into Iraq, which is a direct cause of Iraq's own water crisis and the collapse of its farmland.
And Iran's crisis fits right into that pattern, creating pressure on its neighbors.
It does. It contributes to environmental migration. When rural economies in Iran collapse because of drought, people are forced to move, and that creates pressure. And how Iran manages its shared rivers with, say, Afghanistan or Turkey, that raises tensions. The message is clear. When a major country fails to manage its water, that instability rarely stays inside its own borders.
So when a crisis like this gets so bad that it threatens the existence of a megacity, the conversation naturally shifts. It goes from being about hydrology to being about politics and accountability.
It always does.
What's the dominant narrative that's trending right now, both inside Iran and among analysts looking in from the outside?
The big one, the one you see everywhere, is the idea of the water mafia.
That's a very dramatic term. What does it actually mean? Is it a literal criminal organization?
Not in the classic sense, no. It's more of a powerful, informal, and deeply corrupt network. It's made up of government officials, contractors with strong political connections, and key security institutions.
And they control the water infrastructure.
They effectively control it, and more importantly, they profit from it. The term is used by analysts, by journalists like Nick Kausar, and just by regular citizens to describe this entrenched power structure that's really solidified over the past couple of decades.
Who are the key players in this network that people are pointing fingers at?
The accusations are often directed at a very tight circle linked to the state's security apparatus. A central player is said to be the engineering arm of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
Specifically, Khatam al-Anbiya.
Exactly, that's their big construction headquarters, along with its subsidiaries. And they often worked hand in glove with the Ministry of Energy and these very influential, politically connected consulting firms.
Okay, so if the goal of this water mafia was profit and patronage, not water security, can you give an example of a project that was, say, Hydrologically crazy, but politically very profitable.
Oh, absolutely. Their whole strategy was to funnel huge public budgets into these massive headline-grabbing mega projects, mostly dams and very complex long-distance water diversion canals.
And these were sold to the public as a good thing.
They were marketed as symbols of national pride, of self-sufficiency, especially while under international sanctions. But many analysts argue they were really just vanity projects designed to create a patronage economy.
So they got huge budgets by skipping the science.
They often bypassed proper scientific review or environmental impact assessments because they had political protection. There was very little scrutiny. The focus was never on water security. It was on maximizing contracts and keeping political control over infrastructure.
And the result is what we see today.
Exactly. The ecological disasters we see are a direct outcome. The drying of Lake Urmia, for example, which was once the second largest saltwater lake in the world.
What happened there?
It's a direct result of over 40 dams being built on the rivers that fed into it. And many of those projects were tied to these same powerful entities.
In the Zayanda-Rud River in Isfahan.
Same story. It dried up because its water was diverted hundreds of kilometers away to serve politically favored industrial projects, often with military links, in other provinces. It's a system of environmental injustice, really.
Treating certain regions as sacrifice zones to benefit the powerful.
And the most toxic part of it all is the impunity. The members of this network, especially those tied to the security forces, they enjoy this de facto immunity from prosecution.
Right.
So they can generate these massive opaque profits, ignore all the ecological red lines, and devastate downstream communities with no consequences. That double standard has just completely destroyed public trust.
And that lack of trust is what's fueling the protests we're seeing. Let's talk about that. We know water has been a flashpoint before. But how have the 2025 protests been different?
Water has been sparking major unrest for years. I mean, we all saw the huge water protests back in 2021 in Khuzestan and Isfahan. The state's response then was incredibly brutal.
Right, security forces use deadly force.
But these recent protests seem to have a much broader scope. They're linking this one issue, the environmental failure, to a much wider demand for political rights.
How did they start?
They started small, actually. In early May 2025, it was mostly university students protesting the unsanitary conditions and the constant outages on their campuses. But by July and August, the movement had just exploded.
Drawing in other groups.
All sorts of groups that you don't normally see involved in political activism. Truck drivers, bakers, retirees, farmers in these smaller, hard-hit cities like Sabzavar.
So it's become a much wider societal response to just systemic failure. It's not just about a dry tap anymore.
That's the crucial shift. What began as a protest about basic needs, water, electricity in the middle of a heat wave, it quickly evolved into these broader demands for dignity and systemic change.
The slogans changed.
The slogans changed completely. They went from technical complaints to purely political statements. Water, electricity, life are basic right, and calls for the removal of incompetent officials. It's exposing the corruption, the inequality, and the state's basic failure to deliver.
And this is why it's merging with other social movements, isn't it?
Absolutely. The water crisis is now this highly visible symbol of a dysfunctional government. So it's giving new energy to other grievances. You're seeing women, for example, who are already challenging the system, joining these rallies and openly defying the compulsory hijab rules.
They see the lack of water as part of the same system that's failing to protect their basic needs and dignity.
Exactly. The environmental crisis is acting as a direct catalyst in the fight for personal freedom and social justice. The loss of water security is now tied directly to economic pain and the shrinking of public space.
And, of course, the international community has been weighing in. What has that external scrutiny looked like?
The external framing has been overtly geopolitical. It's been used as a weapon, essentially.
How so?
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly addressed the Iranian people, using the environmental collapse as a way to encourage internal pressure against the regime.
Right.
He explicitly urged Iranians to take risks for freedom, and he directly equated the thirst for water with the thirst for freedom.
So a clear attempt to leverage the disaster for political ends. What about the internal response from the religious establishment? That must have been a sharp contrast.
A profoundly jarring contrast. Instead of addressing the decades of mismanagement, some clerics just urged citizens to pray for rain. And in a few highly publicized cases, they blame the drought on what they see as moral failings. Such as women not abiding by the compulsory hijab.
That is an incredible disconnect. On one hand, you have external powers weaponizing survival, And on the other, you have internal figures reducing a massive infrastructural failure to moral policing.
It suggests a deep, and you have to assume, purposeful disconnect from reality. It shows a regime that is prioritizing ideological control over technical competence and the welfare of its people.
And what happens to the experts who try to point out the real causes?
Well, when technical experts try to link the water shortages to corruption or to powerful groups like the IRGC-linked companies, they face intense pressure, professional retaliation, sometimes even prison. It reveals a system where data itself has become politicized.
So just questioning why a river is dry can be twisted into an act of treason.
Exactly. And when the state finds that basic moral claim for dignity and survival to be so threatening, it tells you everything you need to know about its own failures and its lack of legitimacy.
We've also seen other theories pop up online beyond just the water mafia narrative. People are drawing comparisons to other major urban water crises, aren't they?
They absolutely are. The day zero narrative is everywhere.
The one from Cape Town's crisis in 2018.
Yes, it's referenced constantly on social media and in analysis of Tehran's situation. People are looking at the Cape Town playbook, the severe rationing, the threat of turning off the municipal taps, and that last-minute public push that managed to avert disaster.
But how is Tehran's situation different from what happened in Cape Town?
Well, Cape Town's crisis was primarily a climate and geographical problem that was ultimately solved through, pretty strong governance and public cooperation.
A united front.
Right. Tehran's problem is compounded by 5 decades of structural corruption and mismanagement. They have far fewer viable alternative water sources and, crucially, a state structure that actively resists the kind of transparency and accountability you need for an effective response. Tehran's day zero risk is political, not just hydrological.
And what about the talk of environmental refugees? Is that starting to trend globally?
It is, especially among international aid organizations and climate activist groups. You have analysts and even just TikTok users using satellite imagery to track the collapse of rural areas around Tehran, places like Sistan and Baluchistan,
And predicting what comes next.
predicting that environmental displacement is going to be the biggest long-term consequence. And this is forcing a global realization that a water management failure in one country directly becomes a refugee crisis and an instability problem for the entire region.
So let's pull back. We've covered the shortages, the deep structural roots. Why should someone listening to this, maybe in a city that feels very water secure, care about Tehran's countdown to day zero?
Because Tehran's struggle is a vital, urgent case study for every major city in the world. It demonstrates the extreme vulnerability of megacities when decades of mismanagement crash head-on into climate change.
Right.
For any city with a population over, say, 9 or 10 million, the margin for error is basically zero. Tehran is a terrifyingly detailed blueprint for what happens when governments wait too long to modernize their infrastructure and tackle corruption.
It proves that water isn't just a resource issue, it's a political catalyst. It can determine the stability of the entire state.
That's it, exactly. Water scarcity magnifies every other problem a country has. It exposes corruption, it deepens inequality, and it creates this immediate political flashpoint. Because at a fundamental level, citizens see that the state can no longer uphold its side of the social contract.
To provide the basics for survival.
And when a state fails at that level, instability is almost inevitable.
Let's analyze the human cost of that a little more. You mentioned that displacement is the next big risk.
The human cost is environmental migration on a massive scale. As the aquifers collapse and farming becomes impossible, entire rural economies are just unraveling.
No, families are forced to move.
They have to abandon their land and move to the fringes of cities that are already under immense stress, like Tehran. They often end up in these informal settlements, which increases competition for the few jobs and services that exist, and that just ratchets up social tension.
It's a national security challenge in the making.
A huge one. People lose their income, but they also lose their dignity, their connection to their heritage and their land.
So if Tehran is facing this water bankruptcy, what's the path forward? Are there solutions? If we look globally, what resilience strategies could actually work here?
The solutions have to be integrated. They have to be multidimensional. Iran has to move far beyond its historical obsession with just building more and more expensive, unsustainable dams.
Right, which often cause the problem.
We can contrast their situation with a city that successfully stared down its own water bankruptcy, like Perth in Australia.
What did Perth do?
Perth faced a severe, prolonged drought and realized that relying on rainfall just wasn't sustainable anymore. So they shifted, and they shifted fast.
Yeah.
They invested heavily in large-scale wind-powered desalination plants.
Turning seawater into drinking water.
And crucially, they focused on wastewater recycling and reuse. They now actively recharge their groundwater aquifers with highly treated wastewater.
And the result?
The result is that today, only about 8% of Perth's water comes from rainfall. It shows how you can decouple a city's fate from the whims of the climate.
That's the difference between dependence and resilience.
Mm-hmm.
What would that look like in Iran? What are the big technical fixes they need?
Well, first and foremost, immediate and aggressive reform of the agricultural sector. That is non-negotiable.
So stop growing thirsty crops.
Stop growing things like rice and watermelons in the desert. Pivot to high-value, drought-tolerant alternatives like saffron or pistachios, which Iran is famous for anyway.
And improve irrigation.
Invest massively in modern, efficient irrigation systems to slash that 90% consumption figure. And third, water recycling and reuse, which is almost negligible in Iran right now, needs to become a central part of their strategy.
And what about fixing the infrastructure, the leaks?
That requires system-wide upgrades. They need to implement modern monitoring systems.
Yes.
SCADA is the technical term, that can track pressure and flow in real time to cut down on those leaks.
And better quality control.
Absolutely. Enforce standards for pipe installation, invest in training specialized personnel, and, crucially, they have to abandon the low-price subsidy model. They need a tiered pricing structure that actually punishes waste and generates the revenue you need for maintenance.
But as our sources stress, Iran has the engineers who know how to do all this. The real barrier isn't technical. It's political.
It is entirely political. Iran has highly qualified hydrologists. What they lack is a government that is willing to challenge the entrenched interests, that water mafia network we talked about.
So taking on powerful domestic groups is the biggest hurdle to climate resilience.
It is. The exit path demands transparency, accountability, and a willingness to stop rewarding that same small circle of power brokers. The country has to reframe water management as a core national security issue, prioritizing public welfare over prestige projects.
So without that political will, even a few good years of rain won't solve the problem.
It will only provide temporary relief. It won't solve the structural bankruptcy.
And that brings us to a final point. How does this internal struggle in Iran raise the geopolitical risk for its neighbors?
As the pressure mounts internally, the likelihood of tensions over shared rivers with neighboring countries increases dramatically. If your own population is desperate, you're much less willing to abide by water-sharing agreements.
Right.
Historically, water stress has been a threat multiplier. It makes existing conflicts worse. The risk now is that it becomes the catalyst for new conflict, where water is treated as a weapon rather than as the basis for shared security.
It really feels like a desperate race between climate degradation, which is accelerated by their own policies, and the need for profound political reform. And right now, it seems like climate degradation is winning.
The structural challenge is immense. It's about shifting the national focus away from national pride in building grand dams to a simple respect for people's right to safe water. And that shift requires accountability, which is the one thing the current system seems least willing to offer.
That's a profound thought to end on. The current crisis makes environmental scrutiny a security threat in Iran, where questioning a drying river can literally be twisted into treason. If the state finds that basic moral claim for water and dignity so threatening, what does that say about its real priorities? And how do citizens win that dignity when their very survival has become politicized? That's a question that applies far beyond Tehran's borders, and it's a reminder that good governance is always the first and best line of defense against climate disaster. Next episode, we shift from one environmental emergency to another global shock as a major Japan earthquake sends search activity spiking worldwide. We'll unpack what happened, why it matters, and how it's impacting the region.